Welcome back, guys. Before we start, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Share this video with your friends and let me know where you're watching from. Thanks. Now let's get into it. I've hunted monsters for 23 years, and I've never seen anything like what stalks the Blue Ridge. The mountains have always had their share of secrets. Shadows in the fog, whispers carried on the wind. But this is different. It's smarter, meaner. I came here after a string of killings, claw marks too wide for any bear, footprints too deep for any wolf. Locals call it dogman. They speak the name in hushed tones like it's some Appalachian boogeyman. But I've seen the bodies. This thing ain't folklore. I go by Cutter. Not my real name, but it's what stuck after Wyoming. I don't talk about Wyoming. What matters is I know what I'm doing, and I don't scare easy. But when I stepped off my dirt-caked Jeep, breathed in the cold mountain air, and caught that smell, wet fur and blood, I knew I was in over my head. The damn trees seemed to lean closer, listening. I made camp just off Devil's Hollow, where the last victim, a hunter named Lester Crane, was found torn open like a gutted deer. I strung silver wire around the perimeter, loaded my revolver with custom .45 rounds. Silver core, hollow point. My tent sat like a lone coffin under a canopy of stars. Night fell fast like the mountain was swallowing the sun. That's when the howling started. It wasn't coyote. Wasn't wolf. It was wrong. Too deep, too long, like a scream stretched until it snapped. It echoed across the ridge, and the woods fell silent, like the whole damn forest was holding its breath. I sat by the fire, revolver on my lap, staring into the black between the trees. Something watched me. I could feel it. I heard footsteps around 214M. Slow, deliberate, just outside the wire. Something big. Branches cracked. My breath turned to fog. I clicked the hammer back, whispered, "Come on then." The fire flickered. A shadow moved just past the edge of light. Yellow eyes blinked once, then vanished. My finger twitched on the trigger. Morning came like a punch to the jaw. I barely slept. Whatever it was, it didn't attack. It watched, studied. I found tracks. Long, wide, almost human, but with claws. And piss on my gear. Territorial. This thing's marking me. That's not hunting. That's a warning. I packed up and moved deeper. The only way to kill a cryptid is to think like one. But I could feel it getting inside my head, like it was already 10 steps ahead. If I was going to survive, I'd need more than bullets and wire. I'd need to become the monster. By the third day, I'd made it deeper into the woods than most folks dared go. No signal, no trails, just the quiet hiss of wind weaving through pine needles. I followed the blood scent. Faint, but there. It clung to the moss like old rust. Whatever this dogman was, it bled once. That meant it could bleed again. I crossed a dried creek bed where bones poked from the mud. Animal, mostly, but one femur looked wrong. Too smooth. Too human. Midday brought a break in the trees, a clearing marked with a stone chimney, all that remained of a burnt-out ranger cabin. That's where I found her. Or she found me. Tall, lean, rifle slung across her back like it belonged there since birth. She stepped out of the brush and said, "You huntin' it too?" Her voice had the rasp of pine smoke and sleepless nights. Name was Harlow Boone. Said she used to be a ranger until things got weird. Harlow showed me her notebook. Sketches, dates, maps, blood samples pressed between wax paper. "I've tracked it since '09, she said. "It's a territorial predator, migratory. Comes here every 7 years. She tapped the latest sketch. Yellow eyes. Wolf face. Upright. "But this one remembers. It learns." "You think it's following me?" I asked. Harlow nodded. "It's testing you. You're new meat in its yard. It's deciding whether to kill you or just scare you off." She tossed me a flask. Moonshine, sharp as razors. "But it don't scare easy either. We'll have to outthink it." That night we didn't set a fire. We sat in the cold with only stars above and pine needles beneath, whispering plans. I told her about the silver rounds. She told me that didn't work last time. "Silver's a myth," she said. "It's the heart. You gotta destroy the heart. Burn it if you can." She paused. "But first, we trap it. Make it bleed again." Around 3 a.m., the trees stirred. No breeze. just movement. Slow, calculated. A low growl curled around the clearing like fog. Harlow lifted her rifle. It's close. The yellow eyes returned. Closer this time. 10 yards, maybe less. My hand shook on the revolver. The eyes blinked once. Then they vanished into the dark again, leaving claw prints where no one had heard a single step. The next morning, Harlow took me to an old hunter's blind up on Widow's Ridge. Wind tore at the rusted tin roof, and the ladder groaned like it remembered every death that happened nearby. From the ridge, you could see the whole valley below. Dense, breathless forest broken only by an ancient logging trail and a crooked creek. It was the kind of place that swallowed men whole. This is where it ambushed a search party in 2016, Harlow muttered. Only one man came back, tongue ripped out, eyes gone. We began laying the trap. Chicken guts, deer urine, and something I'd never smelled before. Rotted liver soaked in kerosene and what Harlow called witch's oil. She claimed it came from an old woman in Gatlinburg who'd seen the creature once and lost both sons the next night. It hates the smell, she said, but it can't resist it either. We strung the bait with piano wire and stakes sharpened with flint, a deadfall rigged to collapse once triggered. By sundown, we were buried in the blind, shivering in the dark. Harlow kept her rifle trained on the clearing below. I kept my revolver warm in my hand. The forest was too quiet again. No bugs, no owls, just that oppressive stillness like the woods were holding their breath, same as us. Then, at midnight, the trap snapped. A low thwump, a yelp, sharp and furious. We both bolted upright, weapons raised. Below, in the moonlight, it writhed. Limbs too long for a man, muscles knotted like ropes, fur matted with blood and sap. One leg caught in the wire, deep enough that the bone glinted. It turned its head toward us. No pain in those eyes, only hatred, and then it howled. The sound was hell's siren, loud enough to shatter your skull from the inside out. My ears rang. Harlow screamed, clutching her head. I fired. Once, twice. But the thing tore free like the wire was twine. It vanished into the trees, trailing blood and something worse. Intelligence. It had let us wound it, but not kill it. A warning. This wasn't a beast. It was a strategist. Back at camp, Harlow was pale and silent. She stitched her eardrum with shaking hands. I cleaned my revolver in the cold silence, heart hammering like a war drum. We hadn't won. We hadn't even drawn. We'd been played. It's not hunting us, I whispered, mostly to myself. It's testing us. Harlow nodded. Then we make sure we pass the next test. We tracked the blood trail north through a ravine choked with fallen birch and thorny underbrush. It moved fast for something wounded. Too fast. The blood came in thick smears at first, then thinner, like it had realized we were following. It's baiting us, Harlow said grimly, trying to draw us out of our ground. Still, we followed. Pride or instinct, I couldn't tell anymore. But I knew we were getting closer. Every print we found was hotter, fresher. The woods grew darker as we moved deeper, like the trees were leaning in, listening again. The air was thicker too, stank of rot and musk. That's when we found the den. A hollow beneath a massive oak, roots twisted like claws. Bones littered the mouth. Some bleached white, others wet and red. Antlers, skulls, a boot, just one. Harlow didn't speak. She just nodded, set her rifle down, and lit a Molotov. We didn't speak as we tossed the bottle into the den. The fire roared up, unnatural and hungry. The flames danced blue at the edges. Then came the scream. Not an animal. Not a man. Something in between. Something older. The earth shook beneath us, and the den exploded from within. Dirt, roots, and fire belched skyward, and something huge burst from the earth. It wasn't just big. It was armored in thick, scarred hide, fur black as coal, matted with sap and blood. Its head looked canine, but elongated like a mask stretched too far. Fangs too long. Claws like scythes. It hit Harlow first, knocking her 15 feet into a tree. I opened fire, emptying my revolver into its ribs. It staggered. Once. Then roared and charged. I rolled beneath its swipe, felt claws graze my back, searing like fire. I pulled my boot knife, slashed upward. Caught it across the chest. Black blood spilled, hissing on the dirt. It howled again, this time in pain. Real pain. That gave me an opening. I scrambled to Harlow, dragging her behind a boulder as the dogman circled, breathing heavy, limping now. But not done. Harlow groaned, blood in her mouth. "It's slowing down," she coughed. "It's bleeding bad." I shook her. "Can you move?" She nodded barely. "We gotta end this." I looked down at my knife, at the silver bullets rattling useless in my pocket. "Then we go primal," I said. "We take it up close." The creature growled from the edge of the trees. It knew what we were planning. It was ready. But so were we. We'd lit its nest, tasted its blood. Now it was our turn to show fangs. We waited until the dogman circled wide, slipping back into the dark, watching, bleeding. That's when I pulled Harlow close and whispered the plan. "We divide it. Force it to split focus. I draw it out, you flank it from the ridge." Harlow's face was a mess, blood from her temple, bruises blooming like nightshade across her cheek. But her eyes were sharp steel. "Make it count," she said, then limped toward the ridge with her rifle clutched like a crucifix. I walked out into the clearing with fire in my hands. 2 more Molotovs strapped to my vest, my knife clenched in my right. The revolver was empty now, useless weight on my hip. I didn't need bullets. I needed rage. I needed to meet the beast eye to eye. I howled into the forest, loud, mimicking the sound it made the first night. It echoed across the trees like a challenge. I waited. It came. From the brush, it charged like a freight train, mouth wide and steaming. I threw the first bottle. It burst against its shoulder, flames licking up its side. It screamed. Rage, pain, confusion. The second bottle hit its chest, and for a moment it staggered, engulfed in fire. But it kept coming, trailing smoke like a demon breaking free of hell. It hit me full force. I flew back, slammed into a stump. My ribs cracked. I couldn't breathe. It loomed over me, fire dying along its hide, black blood bubbling beneath the burns. Its breath stank of old meat and rage. Claws lifted. And then, crack. Harlow's rifle rang out. The bullet tore through its throat, a geyser of black spraying across the clearing. It shrieked and turned, giving me my only shot. I lunged up, buried the knife in its side. Deep, twisting until I felt something give. It threw me again, screeching, staggering backward. Harlow fired again, then again. I crawled forward, each inch agony, and found the thing lying on its side. Breathing, barely, its eyes locked with mine. No hate now, no fear, only confusion, like it was trying to understand why it lost. I stood over it, pulled the last Molotov, and smashed it across its chest. The fire roared up as I stumbled back, dragging Harlow with me. The thing thrashed, limbs spasming, its chest caving in under the heat. It screamed one last time. High, broken. Then fell still. The fire burned on, and I knew it wouldn't rise again. Not this one. We collapsed against the tree line, broken and shaking. Harlow coughed blood. "You see its eyes?" she rasped. "It didn't die like an animal." I nodded, staring into the flames. "No," I said. "It died like a god being forgotten." The fire burned well into morning. Nothing but blackened bones and twisted sinew remained where the dogman fell. Its heart, if that's what the seething black mass had been, was ash. Harlow and I watched in silence, backs against the cold bark, hands trembling from blood loss and adrenaline. I'd killed men before. Monsters even. But this thing, it had watched us. It had thought about us. That was different. That was worse. Harlow was slipping in and out of consciousness, her lips cracked and dry. I tore my flannel into strips and wrapped what I could. Her pulse was weak but steady. "We need out of the ridge," I muttered. "They'll come looking." She stirred slightly. "Who?" I asked. She opened one eye and said, "The others." It wasn't alone. I froze. "What do you mean?" I demanded, leaning in. "That thing barely died." She shook her head. "It was the alpha. There's always a pack. They send the biggest first. The one who can kill or die in their name. If it fails, the others come later. Smarter, quieter." She coughed, a deep rattle in her lungs. "You've started a war, Gunslinger." The thought hollowed me out. I looked to the woods, now lit with gold morning rays, and saw nothing. No movement. But I felt it. Like distant thunder under my skin. Watching. Judging. The ridge was no longer quiet because it wanted to be. It was quiet because the forest had just shifted around us. I'd cut the head off something bigger, something older than I'd guessed. I carried Harlow down the ridge, following old ranger paths until I found her ATV stashed beneath brush. The engine roared like salvation. Every mile out felt like running backward through hell. By the time I reached the edge of the forest, I turned for one last look. That's when I saw them. Figures, tall, thin, upright. 4 or 5, maybe more, standing just beyond the tree line. Yellow eyes catching the light like coins in the dark. They didn't chase. Not yet. They only watched. And when I blinked, they were gone. Like they'd never been there. But I knew. I knew what I'd seen. What I'd started. Harlow was passed out cold, whispering something in her sleep. I only caught one word: return. That was 2 years ago. I left the mountains. Took up work far west, plains and deserts. Places with no trees, no shadows. But they still haunt me. Sometimes I dream of yellow eyes. Sometimes I hear a howl that's not quite human. And every time I close my eyes, I remember. I'm not the predator anymore. The nightmares stopped when I went back. Not because the fear was gone, but because I knew running wouldn't save me. I buried Harlow in Tennessee, under a hickory tree near the place she called her safe hill. She never woke again. Her last breath came during a thunderstorm, and when the lightning struck the ridge, I swear I saw shapes watching from the tree line. They didn't try to stop me that day, maybe out of respect. Maybe because they knew I'd be back. I was ready this time. Silver didn't work. Bullets were a joke. But fire, traps, and instinct. That was a language they understood. I spent a year prepping. Built my own gear. Studied every journal Harlow left behind. I carved symbols into the knives, bought thermals, made bait out of embalming fluid and deer blood soaked in coal oil. I became more monster than man. That's how you beat one. I returned to the ridge on the blood moon, the same cycle when the first dogman died. They were waiting. 7 of them. Slender, tall, limbs too long, eyes like molten gold. I didn't sneak. I walked right into their den, fire and blade ready. The first came fast, leaping from the trees, claws flashing. I ducked, sliced up, caught its throat, and set it aflame with a touch of my torch. The scream it made rattled the whole damn forest. The second tore through my shoulder, but I caught it with a gut shot laced in phosphorus. It lit like dry brush. 2 down. Then the rest came. They moved in unison, circling me like ghosts in the smoke. But I didn't retreat. I charged. A blade in one hand, a lit flare in the other. I fought through the pain, through the blood. One by one, I brought them down. Not with luck. With fury. Fire cleansed them. Steel silenced them. I made sure every heart was burned. When dawn broke, the woods were quiet again. Not the dead kind of quiet, but a relieved quiet. The air shifted. Lighter. Like something had lifted. No more watchers. No more eyes in the dark. I buried the blades beneath the roots of the old oak. Left the forest scorched, scarred, and free. I don't know if they'll ever return. But if they do, I'll be waiting. Because I'm not just a hunter anymore. I'm the last godkiller in the Blue Ridge Mountains. When my son was young, and in his first year in Boy Scouts, we hiked the Lake Ozette Triangle for one of our outings. After setting up camp, me and one of the other dads went scouting for water. On the way up the beach, there is this little Native American shack that has all kinds of bones and things in it that was some kind of memorial. We checked it out. It was pretty cool, if a little creepy. We kept going and found a little stream and filtered a bunch of water to make our breakfast and some coffee in the morning. It has gotten dark by the time we were done. On our way back down the beach, we start hearing little rocks haunt the beach around us. We didn't see them, but they sounded maybe the size of baby potatoes. We didn't know what it was at first. Maybe a seagull was dropping them. Maybe we're kicking rocks and not realizing it. As it kept happening, we became sure that it wasn't us, and that no seagulls were still out. Around this time, we are reaching about the spot of that weird shack again. We hear this loud whoop, and more rocks hit. I'm thinking it's some asshole native kids messing with us. But we're nowhere. There's no campfires, no smells, nothing indicating a camp. Nothing. Then whoop, again. More rocks. My buddy and start walking faster and faster until we're at a dead run, laughing out a cess off at how ridiculous we feel. but how scared we are at the same time. No idea what it was, but it sounded a lot like what those Bigfoot people say they sound like, and it was tossing rocks. Neither of us really wanted to find out for sure. On the night of November 1st this year, I was taking my dog out when I looked down the street from my house and saw a strange-looking creature walking across the street. I only saw it for a second or two, but I'll describe it the best I can. The first feature I noticed in my short glimpse were these two ridiculously long, bony, pitch-black legs, a back that sloped downwards, two short front legs, and a head that poked out the front. My first reaction was to think, back inside now. My dog saw the creature too and immediately wanted back inside. This was the only experience I've had like this, and I'm hoping I'm not the only one who has seen a creature like this. Okay, before I start, I have had 7 encounters with skinwalkers, the first being when I was 9 and the last one 3 months ago. I am now 16. So, I don't know if what I call a skinwalker is what everyone else thinks a skinwalker is. I have been calling them that since my second encounter when I was 10, before I knew that skinwalkers were already a thing. If you want to skip all the background information, skip to paragraph 8 where the encounter starts. Okay, on to the story. Like I stated earlier, I am 16 and I currently live in Massachusetts. I have also lived in Michigan and Wisconsin, and have had encounters in both. I live near Boston, but was going on a road trip with my friend and his family out to their new place in the more remote parts of Massachusetts. And yes, Massachusetts has remote parts. I'll call my friend Chad. We got to their house, and I was planning on staying for about a week to help them get settled in, and to see the surrounding area. At the edge of their property, they have these woods that start off with just a few trees here and there, but after a 5-minute walk, get really dense. On the third day of me being there, Chad's mom said she wanted to give me and Chad a day off so we could do whatever we wanted. At first, we wandered around the property and hung around the house. Then we chose to walk to the closest town. This takes 30 minutes. The town's small and there isn't much to do, but I'm happy just to be back in a place like I lived for most of my life, small and in the middle of nowhere. We talked to the owner of an ice cream shop who told us a bit of history about the town, nothing important or exciting. After that, we started back to Chad's house. We got back around noon, and I suggested we go for a walk in the woods. Chad, who isn't the outdoorsy type, said no, but after a couple of minutes of me nagging him to go, he agreed. Even though I go out all the time, I camp and walk trails at night most of the time. I have gotten paranoid due to the skinwalkers and the other stuff, so I always have my pocket knife with me when I go out like this, so I ran into the house to get it. We started into the woods, leaving a really obvious trail. Like I said, the woods are very thick. At first, Chad spent his time grumbling things like, "There are too many bugs," and "It's too warm out to be doing this." Keep in mind last month was October. After a while, he started to enjoy being outside and actually said he liked it and wanted to go farther into the woods. By now, it was about 4:30, and it was starting to get dark, but I didn't really care all that much. We kept going, and dark fell rapidly to the point where I couldn't see much. Okay, thank you for staying with the story thus far. This is the part with the encounter. We had started on our way back, but at some point, we got separated. I noticed this and turned the flashlight app on my phone on, spinning around to see if I could see Chad. I couldn't. "Chad," I called out. "Can you hear me? If you can, say something." I waited, and a few moments later, off to my right, I heard a feeble stammer. "Zach." Zach is my name. It sounded just like Chad, and I quickly turned in the direction of the noise and slowly walked towards it. I didn't see anything, so I moved my light horizontally to try and spot anything. I called out again, "Chad," and got "Zach" again. It was much stronger and louder this time. I walked forward with more confidence but stopped dead in my tracks as I heard something big moving very quickly through the brush from right behind me. I whipped around frantically and came face to face with Chad. At first, I was stunned. I had heard him from the opposite direction. Up to this point in my life, I had only encountered a skinwalker with another person once, and we were together when it happened, so this situation was new to me. "What the F? Why did you walk behind me to get me? Why didn't you come from the same direction as your voice?" I practically yelled at him, overcome by anger at being tricked like that. What are you talking about? You were the one changing directions, Chad yelled back. What? I said quietly. I shined my light on him and could see he was obviously shaken. I heard you call my name, and I started walking to you. You sounded scared or hurt at first, but after a few minutes, you started saying my name normally. Then you stopped answering my calls, and I heard you from behind me, and I saw your light, so I started running at you, Dick, he explained. I paled, finally putting the pieces together. I had encountered skinwalkers that could impersonate a person's voice before, and I realized that a skinwalker or something of the sort was in the woods with us. There was the faint noise of movement behind me, and I turned around to see a horrible sight not 10 feet from me. Its head looked like a wolf's, like the kind you would see at the zoo. It was tall, maybe 6.5 feet tall. Its head, shoulders, arms, and chest were all covered in thick gray and white fur. Its legs and most of its stomach had a much thinner pelt of the same fur. Both Chad and I saw this creature and ran faster than I thought we could. For whatever reason, the creature didn't give chase, and we made it out of the forest without incident, Chad told his family, who didn't believe him. I didn't tell mine because they haven't believed me about this stuff in the past. Chad has not gone back in the woods and has not seen the beast again. It didn't look like the other skinwalkers I had encountered before, and at this point, I only call it a skinwalker because I have no other name for it other than wolfman. But I am not calling it that. I have looked it up, and the only thing I could find is a werewolf, but I don't think that's it. For one, it wasn't a full moon. If you have any ideas on what this creature was, I am open to suggestions. The cold of Alaska has a way of seeping into your bones, of settling into the marrow until you feel like you've become a part of the wilderness itself. That's how I felt when I first began working as a park ranger in Denali National Park. The untouched beauty of the land was intoxicating. Majestic peaks looming over vast forests, rivers running through valleys like veins. But there was a sense of isolation here that was palpable, a silence that felt too thick at times, as if the land itself was holding its breath. I wasn't prepared for what I would learn, for what I would encounter. The rangers told me to keep to my patrols, to keep an eye on the trails, and to watch out for the occasional lost hiker. But they didn't warn me about the creatures. The things that had been spotted deep in the woods, beyond the reach of our limited knowledge. I was on a routine check when I met Jack Alverton. He was hunched over his old truck, the engine sputtering as he tried to get it started. His clothes were ragged, worn down by years in the field, and his face was grizzled with the kind of wear that comes from living too long in the wilderness. He wasn't the type of man who looked lost, but I could tell by his posture that something had broken him. Something about the way he stood there, staring at the truck, told me he wasn't just out here for a weekend hunting trip. I approached him cautiously, not wanting to intrude. "You need a hand?" I asked, though my tone was more out of politeness than actual concern. Rangers were supposed to help, even if the situation didn't seem dire. When Jack looked up, I saw it in his eyes. Something darker, something that wasn't right. "You're a park ranger, huh?" he asked, his voice rough like gravel. He wiped his hands on his jacket, leaving a smear of dirt across his forehead. "Then you need to listen. There's something in these woods. Something that's been stalking me for years." I hesitated, unsure if he was just another paranoid soul who had spent too long isolated in the wild, or if there was more to his words than I wanted to believe. "What do you mean, stalking you?" I asked, trying to mask the skepticism in my voice. Jack's gaze darkened. "It's not just the bears or the wolves," he said, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "It's something else. Something that's been taking people, and it's been hunting me for years." Jack's words hung in the air like a thundercloud, heavy and oppressive. I stood there for a moment, unsure how to react. The forest around us, so vast and silent just moments ago, now seemed to pulse with a subtle energy, as though it were listening to our conversation. I glanced at the truck, its engine now silent, and then back at Jack. He was staring at the ground, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the edge of his truck. "I'm not crazy," Jack said, as though sensing my doubt. "I've seen it, I've heard it, and I've felt it watching me. It's not an animal, not like anything you'd find in these woods. It's something else." I took a cautious step closer. "What exactly are you saying?" I asked, my voice more controlled than I felt. You're telling me something's out here. Something that's hunting people. Jack nodded slowly, then shook his head, as if he didn't know where to begin. He sighed deeply, rubbing his forehead. I don't know how to explain it, he muttered. But I know the signs. The way the trees bend in places they shouldn't, the strange sounds in the night. Like whispers, but not from any animal. The way the air goes cold and thick, almost suffocating. Something's out there, and it's been taking people for years. Rangers, hikers, tourists, and no one talks about it. I frowned, trying to keep my composure. It was easy to dismiss this as the ramblings of an isolated man. But there was something about Jack's demeanor, the desperation in his eyes, that made me hesitate. You said it's been hunting you. For years. Jack's lips pressed into a thin line, and his eyes became distant, as though he were reliving something he couldn't escape. The first time I noticed it, I thought I was just seeing things. A shadow, moving in the woods when I was tracking deer. It was too fast to be a bear or any predator I knew. But I shrugged it off, told myself it was nothing. But then the sound started. Footsteps that didn't belong to anything I knew. And the sense that I wasn't alone. Like something was always just out of sight. I shivered, but tried not to let it show. So what exactly is this thing? How do you know it's not just a bear, or maybe even a person? Jack's eyes locked onto mine, and for a brief moment, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Fear. True fear. I've hunted every animal in these woods. I know their habits, their movements. This thing, it's not like any animal I've encountered. It's something that doesn't belong here. Something that's older than the land itself. His words were cryptic, and I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease, though I still tried to hold on to my rationality. I still don't understand, I said. Why hasn't anyone else seen this thing? If it's been around for years, why hasn't anyone caught it on camera or tracked it down? Jack's face grew dark. It knows how to hide. It watches, waits. It's never in the same place twice. And it's smart. Too smart. People who get too close, they don't come back. And if they do, they're not the same. I felt the weight of his words sink in. This wasn't just another wild story. There was something in his voice, something raw and real, that told me Jack wasn't lying. Something had happened to him. Something that had changed him forever. Jack's gaze hardened. I'm telling you this because I'm done running. I'm not going to be the next one it takes. He looked at me, his voice becoming more urgent. You need to be careful out there. If you start noticing things that don't feel right, get out. Get out before it notices you. I nodded, the gnawing feeling of unease now fully settling in my chest. But even as I tried to shake off the discomfort, I couldn't help but wonder, what was this thing Jack was talking about? And why hadn't anyone, including the other rangers, warned me? The next few days passed in a strange blur. Jack's warning had planted a seed in my mind, one that I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. The landscape around me, which had once seemed peaceful, now felt charged with something I couldn't understand. I kept my distance from the deeper trails, the ones Jack had mentioned, but it was hard to ignore the nagging feeling that something was watching me. Something I couldn't see but could feel pressing at the edges of my consciousness. I told myself to focus on my duties, to follow the routine of my patrols. But there was always this undercurrent of tension that made my every step feel deliberate, like I was trying to avoid something rather than just walk through the park. The dense woods had a way of swallowing sound, of making every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves feel amplified like it was someone, or something, lurking just beyond my sight. One evening, as the sky darkened into a rich shade of purple and the stars began to peek through the canopy, I found myself hiking down a narrow trail I hadn't been on before. It was quiet, almost too quiet. There were no birds, no squirrels rustling in the underbrush, just the occasional creak of the trees bending in the wind. I stopped for a moment, a chill creeping up my spine as I scanned the area. Something was off, I could feel it. Then, a snap. The sound of a twig breaking behind me. I whipped around, my heart racing. But the trail behind me was empty. The air was still, except for the faintest rustle of leaves. I frowned, trying to calm my breath. Get a grip, I muttered under my breath. It was probably nothing. Just a deer, or maybe even a squirrel. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I continued walking, but the sense of being followed didn't fade. Each step felt more deliberate, like I was being herded toward something, though I couldn't say what. And then, without warning, the forest seemed to shift. The atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with a strange, almost palpable pressure. It was as if the very land itself was holding its breath. I stopped in my tracks, trying to steady my breathing. The woods were too quiet now, too still, and then I heard it. A sound. A growl, not from any animal I recognized. It came from deeper in the woods, far off the trail, but it was close enough that it sent a tremor through my body. I didn't think, I just reacted. My instincts screamed at me to run, but something held me in place. Something in that sound in the air that told me if I moved too quickly, it would know. It was watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I swallowed hard, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Was it Jack's creature? Was it real, or had my fear gotten the best of me? But before I could answer myself, the growl came again, louder this time, closer. And then, a whisper. The whisper was faint, but it wasn't the wind. It was a voice that felt like it was inside my head, murmuring words I couldn't make out. I had to leave. I turned, nearly stumbling as I rushed back down the trail, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. As I moved, I heard the rustling behind me again, faster now, but I refused to look. I couldn't. The urge to flee was overwhelming, and I didn't care if I made a fool of myself. I just needed to get back to the station. Back to where there were other people, other rangers, and safety. I burst through the trees and back onto the main road, my breath ragged, my body trembling. But when I looked behind me, there was nothing there. No growls, no whispers, no presence. Just the same cold, empty forest stretching out before me. I stood there for a long moment, trying to catch my breath, trying to steady my racing heart. But something told me I wasn't alone. Something told me that whatever had been watching me was still out there, just beyond the trees, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. The eerie feeling I had experienced on the trail lingered, seeping into every crevice of my thoughts. The growls, the whispers, the feeling of being pursued. Everything felt so real. But the rational part of my brain kept telling me it was just the isolation, the nerves, the vast emptiness of Denali playing tricks on me. Yet deep down, I couldn't ignore the fact that something had been out there. Something that wasn't human, and that didn't belong in these woods. The next morning, I went over my patrol route, trying to dismiss the lingering sense of dread. I convinced myself it was just an animal. Maybe a bear, maybe a moose. But the growl hadn't sounded like anything I knew. The whisper hadn't been the wind. It was something else. But what? And why me? I couldn't shake the thought that Jack's warning had been more than just a hunter's tale. I found myself standing in the ranger station, staring at the map of the park, trying to pinpoint the location where I'd heard the growl. I felt like I was missing something, like there was a connection between the strange occurrences and something I wasn't seeing. That's when I noticed it. A section of the park marked as untraveled. The route was old, forgotten. It hadn't been used in years, not by rangers, not by hikers, and certainly not by anyone with sense. The trail was hidden behind a thicket of trees and brush, overgrown and abandoned. It was as though no one had been near it for a long time. And yet, something about it called to me. I didn't know why I felt compelled to investigate it. Maybe it was the pull of Jack's warning, or maybe it was just the desire to understand what I had heard, what I had felt. But in that moment, the unknown trail seemed like the key to everything. If I could find it, maybe I could answer the questions that had been plaguing me. I packed my gear and made my way toward the trailhead. The weather was starting to turn colder, the sky darkening with clouds that promised rain. The air felt heavy, like the land was holding its breath, just as it had the other night. The further I went into the woods, the more the familiar trail faded into a sea of trees and underbrush. It was as if the forest itself was pulling me deeper, guiding me to something I wasn't prepared for. The trail was narrow, overgrown with thick vines and thorny bushes that scratched at my face and arms. Each step felt deliberate, each crack of a branch underfoot echoing too loudly in the stillness. But there was no growl, no whispering voice this time. Just the thick silence, like the woods themselves were waiting, watching. As I ventured further, I began to notice something unsettling. There were signs of disturbance. Broken branches, footprints that didn't look like any animal I recognized. They were too large, too odd in shape, and too deep in the soil. Whoever, or whatever, had left them wasn't walking like a man. I stopped, crouching to inspect the tracks more closely. They didn't match the gait of a bear, a moose, or any other creature I had studied. I stood up, my pulse quickening. I was no longer alone. The woods felt alive, more alive than they had ever felt before. I had stepped onto something ancient, something forgotten by everyone else. That's when I heard it again. A low growl, but this time it was different. It wasn't distant. It was close. Too close. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, my body rigid with fear. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not when I was this close to uncovering the truth. The growl faded into a whisper, and this time I understood the words. Leave, now. The whisper sent a chill down my spine, and for a brief moment, everything around me seemed to freeze. The air thickened, suffocating, and the trees, once towering sentinels of the forest, now seemed to lean in, as if listening to the words that had just echoed through the space between us. I stood motionless, trying to calm the panic that was creeping up my throat. Leave now. The voice was softer this time, but still unmistakable. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal. This was a command, clear and urgent. The weight of the forest pressed down on me, as if the very earth beneath my feet was alive, watching me, waiting for my next move. My heart pounded in my chest, but my legs wouldn't move. The force of the words was too strong, too unnerving. It wasn't just a warning. It felt like a threat. I glanced around, trying to spot the source of the voice, but the trees and underbrush only revealed more shadows, more silence. There was no sign of movement, no creature to blame. It was as though the woods themselves were speaking to me. I wanted to turn back, to leave the trail, but something held me in place. The curiosity, the desire to understand what was happening here, rooted me to the spot. I had to know what this thing was. I had to know why it was stalking me, why it was haunting this place. But then I remembered Jack's warning. The fear in his eyes when he told me that if it noticed me, it would take me too. The thing had already stalked him for years, and now it was watching me. I turned my gaze back to the trail, to the odd, unnatural footprints in the dirt. Whoever, or whatever, had made them was still nearby. The growl had been a signal, a way of announcing its presence, and the whisper was its invitation to leave. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. I had to get out of there. I turned and started to walk quickly, my steps shaky but determined. I could still feel its presence though. Closer than before, like it was following me. Every creak of a branch, every snap of a twig, seemed like a signal, an indication that I was being watched. But just as I thought I was nearly safe, just as I thought the path back to the station was within reach, I heard it again. This time, the growl was loud. Too loud. It reverberated through my chest, making my bones tremble. It was no longer a warning. It was a declaration. It was hunting me. I broke into a run, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I raced down the trail, the underbrush slapping against my legs. The shadows stretched longer, darker, and the growl grew closer with each passing second. My heart thundered in my chest, drowning out everything else. I pushed through the trees, ducking under branches, feeling the branches tear at my clothing. The ground was uneven, and I stumbled more than once, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't slow down. And then, through the dense trees, I saw the clearing ahead. The station, the safety I had been running toward. But just as I reached it, I felt something shift in the air. The growl wasn't behind me anymore. It was in front of me. I froze, skidding to a stop. There, in the clearing, standing just at the edge of the trees, was a figure. A silhouette, tall and impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally long. Its face was hidden in shadow, but its presence filled the space like a dark cloud, suffocating and heavy. For the first time, I saw it. The creature Jack had warned me about. The thing that had been stalking him for years. And now, it had found me. The creature's form stood at the edge of the clearing, so still and silent that for a moment, I wondered if I had imagined it. But the darkness surrounding it seemed to move, swirling and shifting like it was alive. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. This was no hallucination. It was real, and it was staring right at me. I could feel it. The weight of its gaze. There was no face, no features I could make out, only a vague outline, like a shadow that didn't belong in this world. Its arms hung too low, its legs too long, like something that had been twisted and warped by time. The air around it grew colder, and I could hear a sound rising from its chest, like a growl vibrating through the very earth beneath my feet. I didn't dare to move. My instincts screamed at me to run, to flee, but I knew it was too late. If I turned my back, I wouldn't be able to outrun it. It was faster than anything I'd ever encountered. Jack had said that. And as much as my mind screamed at me to act, I couldn't. My body refused to obey. The creature didn't move at first. It just watched, its presence weighing me down like a stone pressing against my chest. I could feel the ground beneath me shaking, as if something deep inside the forest itself was stirring. Then, without warning, the creature took a step forward. The whisper came again, this time louder, clearer. "You are mine." I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. The air felt suffocating, thick with the presence of something ancient, something older than the land itself. I knew in that moment that this creature wasn't just a predator. It was something far more sinister, something that existed beyond the natural order. I started to back away slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible, but every step I took seemed to bring me closer to it. My mind raced. I remembered Jack's warning, "Get out before it notices you." But it had noticed me long ago. I had already made the mistake of coming too close. I had already walked into its territory. I glanced over my shoulder, seeing the station in the distance. The safety I'd been running toward, now seeming miles away. I had to get there, I had to warn someone. But the creature was closing the gap, its steps slow and deliberate, as though it had all the time in the world. I turned and ran again, this time faster, with everything I had. I could hear the creature's footsteps behind me, louder now, the sound of it following, stalking. My legs burned, my breath came in sharp gasps, and the ground seemed to stretch farther away with every step. I reached the edge of the clearing, where the path to the station was just a few feet away, and for a brief moment, I thought I might make it. I thought I might escape. But then, out of nowhere, I felt it. Cold, like ice, gripping my shoulder. The force of it was enough to stop me in my tracks. My body jerked forward, but I didn't fall. The creature's hand, or what I assumed was its hand, was wrapped around my shoulder, its fingers long and impossibly thin, like claws, digging into my flesh. I could feel the pressure of it, cold and unyielding, as though it was trying to pull me into its grasp. I screamed, but the sound was muffled by the roar of the wind. The creature's presence swallowed everything around me. The forest, the clearing, the station. It all felt like a distant memory now. The only thing that mattered was the cold and the darkness and the sense that this was the end. But then, just as I thought I couldn't move, just as I thought it had me, something else happened. The air around me shifted again, and I saw a figure. A silhouette, moving through the trees toward us. The creature paused, its grip on my shoulder loosening just enough that I could gasp for air. The figure in the trees stepped forward, revealing itself to be Jack. "Run!" Jack shouted, his voice sharp and urgent. Now. With everything I had left, I wrenched myself free, stumbling forward, my legs shaking as I bolted toward the station. The creature didn't move, didn't chase me. Not yet. It stayed where it was, watching, waiting. I reached the station, and Jack was already there, his rifle raised, though his hands were shaking. He was ready, but even he seemed uncertain. Jack moved to the door, securing it behind us. The rifle was still clutched tightly in his hands, but his eyes kept darting back to the dark woods outside, as though expecting the creature to burst through at any moment. We were both on edge, but Jack was different from me. He knew this thing better than I did. He had fought it, run from it, survived it for years. He had been a ranger here longer than I had, but I realized now that he wasn't afraid of the wilderness. He was afraid of what it hid. "I don't know how long we've got," Jack finally said, his voice low, worn. "This thing, it doesn't just stalk you. It waits. It watches. And it's patient. It won't stop coming." I nodded, knowing he was right. We could wait it out, but there was no guarantee it would leave us alone. We had no way of knowing where it would strike next, or when. And we had no idea how to defeat it. But there was one thing Jack had been holding on to for years. One shred of hope. "The thing about this creature," he continued, "is that it thrives on fear. It feeds on it. That's what makes it so dangerous. And the longer you fight it, the stronger it gets." "So, what do we do?" I asked, my voice tight. Jack's gaze met mine, a flicker of something burning in his eyes. "We stop running. We face it head on." He was right. I knew it, even as fear clawed at me from the inside. The creature wasn't just something we could run from. It wasn't a bear or a wolf. It was something older, darker. And I had to face it. We both did. We had no choice. The door rattled again, a sharp sound that made my heart leap. The creature was still out there, waiting for us. But this time, we weren't going to run. This time, we were going to fight. And as the storm began to brew outside, I knew one thing for sure. The hunt wasn't over. But it would end tonight. One way or another. The storm outside intensified, lightning flashing through the darkening sky. The wind howled, rattling the windows of the ranger station like the claws of something desperate to get in. But for now, it was just us. Jack, me, and the suffocating tension in the air. We knew the creature was still out there. We could feel it, lurking, watching, waiting for us to make our next move. Jack paced back and forth, his rifle never straying too far from his side. He was in his element, used to surviving in this harsh environment. But even he wasn't sure how long he could keep this up. The creature was too elusive, too cunning. It didn't fight the way any predator would. It didn't act like anything we'd ever faced before. "We have to lure it out," Jack said finally, his voice steady but strained. "It can't resist. We draw it in and trap it." "How?" I asked, trying to hide the fear that was creeping up my spine. "We use its hunger," Jack replied, his eyes hard with determination. "It feeds on fear, right? We'll give it something it can't ignore." I wasn't sure what he meant at first, but then it clicked. The creature didn't just stalk us for sport. It needed something. Something deeper than hunger for flesh. It wanted our fear. And in that moment, I realized Jack had been carrying more than just a rifle. He had a plan. A way to fight back. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Jack set up traps around the station, carefully positioning his gear and weapons. We had no idea if it would work, but there was no other choice. The alternative was to wait for the creature to strike again, to make the first move. We couldn't afford that. I couldn't. The sun dipped below the horizon, and darkness wrapped around us like a suffocating blanket. Every rustle in the wind, every snap of a twig outside, made my heart race. We were being watched, we knew it. But we stayed silent, waiting for it to make its move. Then, just before midnight, it came. The door shuddered violently as the creature slammed into it, sending a deafening sound through the walls of the station. The growl, louder this time, filled the space around us, vibrating the very foundation of the building. I grabbed the rifle, hands shaking, but Jack's calm presence steadied me. "Get ready," he whispered, his voice low and steady. The door exploded inward, the creature lunging into the station with unnatural speed. Its long, thin limbs stretched impossibly as it came toward us, its glowing eyes fixed on me. I could feel its cold breath, heavy with the stench of decay, washing over me. Jack didn't hesitate. He fired. The blast from the rifle echoed in the small station, deafening in the confined space. The creature recoiled, its screech of pain filling the air. But it didn't retreat. It only grew angrier, more violent. It was feeding on the fear, and now it was desperate to claim its prize. We backed away, but we weren't running anymore. We had made our stand. Jack reloaded quickly, and I took a deep breath. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't let the fear control me. Not this time. "I've got a plan," Jack said quickly. "When it lunges again, hit it with everything you've got. Don't hesitate. Don't let it get to you." The creature lunged again, faster than I thought possible. Jack fired twice more, but the thing was too quick. It reached for me, its claws extended, but I was ready. I fired. The bullet struck true, hitting the creature in the chest with a sickening thud. For a moment it faltered, its body trembling. The growl it let out was almost human, a scream of pain and fury. Then, with a final, horrific shriek, it collapsed to the floor. Silence fell. I couldn't breathe. The air felt heavy with the aftermath, the fear still hanging thick in the room. But the creature was still. It wasn't moving. It was over. Jack and I stood there, staring at the lifeless form of the creature, both of us breathing heavily, our bodies shaking from the adrenaline. It was done. "Did we?" I started, but Jack held up a hand. "Don't ask questions, just don't." We watched for a while longer, the weight of the moment sinking in. The thing that had haunted Jack, that had stalked the park, was finally gone. But we both knew in our bones. that there was more out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next opportunity. We couldn't stop it all. Not completely. But for now, we had won. I don't drink, I don't smoke or do drugs. I'd always tell my brother what trails I'd be taking. Sometimes I'd go with friends. Much of the time I'd hiked on my own, but my brother and friends always knew where I'd be going, and no matter where you are in Griffith Park, you get lost and walk down, you're bound to hit civilization. You're never too far unless you stumbled your way out by the zoo, and then there are still vehicles that drive through that road. I really enjoyed the sounds of birds early in the morning when the sun would begin to rise. I was a slow hiker because I was out of shape at the time, so out of shape that I'd laugh with my friends about giving the local mountain lion indigestion if she ever decided to have a good meal. I was for sure easy prey. I'd carry pepper spray, which gave me a false sense of security. Sometimes I'd carry a walking stick for safety reasons mainly, but I thought it just got in the way. I planned the trails I wanted to explore and always told my brother and friend where I was going. Again, I was a morning hiker. I spend maybe 6 to 8, sometimes 12 hours walking trails, but I always get to my Del Sol before sunset. I never planned a hike at night past 12 hours. I hiked the same trails until I felt comfortable, and then I'd switch it up as my body got used to the routes. I'm a planner by nature, so I'd look up the map and follow the trail. Sometimes I deviated. I texted my friend or brother what I planned on doing. Cause effect: the first incident happened in 2005 in Griffith Park, California. This park is in the middle of the city between Burbank and Los Angeles, the Hollywood sign. This was my backyard. I hiked almost every trail from end to end in about 3.5 years several times, and during this time I was unemployed, and I did contract work on the side, so my contract schedule gave me the freedom I needed at that time to make my hiking more enjoyable. I hiked almost daily. I was addicted. When hiking near the observatory side of the park, I'd mainly park near the bird sanctuary or the observatory parking lot. I always began my hikes early morning, mostly right before sunrise. By sunrise, I'd be on the trail and drove home late afternoon or early evening. One morning I began walking on the bird trail sometime around 5 a.m. It was still dark out, and I wanted to hike up to the observatory to watch the sunrise. Like many others have felt, I had the feeling of being watched, but I kept walking. It is in the middle of the city, and even though you'd have silent moments where you could appreciate the local fauna, the sound of the wind and trees, and the sound of Los Angeles traffic, a hum, in the background in some areas, it was never dead silent. As I hiked up the trail, I realized there was a deafening silence. I felt the vacuum sensation many have mentioned. It went on for what seemed about 30 minutes while I walked through switchbacks. I continued to feel watched, and since we did not have a mountain lion, I just kept my guard up and continued to hike. When finally walked out of the silent zone, everything came back to life. It seemed loud when everything came back at once. It was my first experience, and although I knew this was unique, I thought I was the problem. Maybe I temporarily lost my hearing. I'd share my story with other hikers, but no one seemed to have experienced that themselves. This weird incident stuck in my mind, but it didn't stop me from wanting to hike. Missing time and relocation many months later, sometime around November, about 7 months later, I hiked up near Taco Peak where I walked into the vacuum silent zone again. This time I'd been hiking for about 2 hours. At about 8:30, I lost track of time and came to a different trail hours later. I was so confused, disoriented, and scared. The sun was beginning to set when I realized I was on the left side of the observatory's direction, on Fire Break Trail, far from where I planned to hike. Actually, at that point, I hadn't even explored that side of the park before I had to call my twin. He and his friends all loaded into a car and went to find me. By the time they got to me, it was about 18. I thought I was going crazy, and he thought I was nuts for having hiked the trails for more than 14 hours alone. I couldn't explain the loss of time, and I cried. They felt bad for me. I just kept telling them I couldn't explain how I ended up on that side of the park and completely exhausted. I know I had to have been walking because I'd been sweating. I was dirty as if I'd gone off the trail. My muscles and body ached. When I snapped to, I knew I was so far away there was no way I could get to my car from where I was. My brother thought I was disoriented from lack of food, but in my pack, I still had a cold sandwich, enough water in my camelback, and a food bar. I thought maybe something bad happened to me, and I blocked it out of my mind, which scared me into checking everything I wore that day. I took inventory and looked at my unopened sandwich, which the bread should have been a bit soggy from the added miles. But it wasn't, or I thought, if I was knocked off my feet, the sandwich would, for sure, be smashed, but it wasn't. I even checked my panties thinking maybe I was assaulted and blocked it out. But nope, there's no discomfort in that area or any clues as to what happened. I was so disturbed by this experience that I threw out all I was wearing except my camel pack. I just didn't want to wear it again. Shaking my head. I didn't hike for several weeks after that. It just felt weird, but I was addicted so I couldn't stay away long. I went back to hiking a week after the new year 2006. Missing time and relocation. My third experience happened less than a year later around August 2006, definitely after the 4th of July. The plan was to park by the Bird Trail, walk down to the Riverside Trail up to Hogback to Dante's View, and down the Brew Trail. Somewhere near Dante's View, I lost time again. I ended up on the opposite side near the El de Zoo. I didn't know how I got to where I was on Condor Trail, way off course again. I was really disoriented, not scared but scared if you know what I mean, more confused and concerned than anything else. The sun was setting as I hiked down the Skyline Trail, and waited for my brother to come and find me by a street light. The only reason I knew what side of the park I was on was because I could see I was by the I-34 and 5 freeway. I was walking in pitch black where I dragged my feet to make sure I didn't go off the hill, only I was way off course again. He picked me up. I got a good scolding, and I tried explaining that I couldn't hike back up to get my car without a flashlight, and I didn't know how I ended up hiking to the wrong area. I didn't tell him of my missing time because I didn't want to hear him beam me out for the next week. He drove me to my car by the Bird Trail and followed me home. I began to carry a flashlight after that and began setting a small recorder during my hikes. I was afraid that I lost so much time and I couldn't account for it. Maybe I was losing it. Was I losing my mind? There's mental illness in my family, and that's always in the shadows. This time I wasn't sweaty or dirty. I just seemed like I was picked up and moved to that side of the park as if I was just starting my hike. I had a slight headache, and body aches but no pain, not like the first time. I want to say there was a couple that passed me and I asked if I was okay, but I said I'm fine. Thank you, and kept going down. Now this part I remember, but I'm not sure if it was a false memory. It's more kind of a blur. Through these experiences, I never felt the fear some have expressed. I was disoriented and afraid of how I could have blocked it out like I explained it to others. But I never heard anything or felt the fear some speak of or seen anything questionable. There are always moments when some hikers and I feel followed and watched. There's a time I had a couple say, "Don't go that way. It's got a weird vibe." That's about it. I actually thought I might have been kidnapped by aliens. Lol. I just couldn't explain some things. I was never fearful to the point that I thought I should stop hiking. I was more concerned by these experiences. Weird feeling. My last experience was shared with my teenage son. We lived in Petersburg, Illinois for a few months. Then we lifted weights together. That day I was super sore, so instead of doing another workout, we decided to go to the school track where I could walk and he'd run laps. The area was empty. No cars anywhere. Being a small town, everything tended to go quiet earlier than we were used to, and this was around 21. Upon our arrival, we walked a lap and he decided to run one. I continued walking, and then I felt a horrible sensation of being watched and the feel of a threat. I kept looking over the fence towards a pitch black field, and I couldn't shake the feeling. My son ran over and looked at me. Frantically, we both said we must go now, and because of each other's reactions we felt the rise of panic and ran to his truck, and he frantically rattled his keys. We got in. He put the key in the ignition and we drove off screaming at each other, "Go! Go!" As soon as we got a few blocks away, we felt a huge sigh of relief and began talking and laughing at each other's reactions. We couldn't explain what happened, and my husband thought we just fed off each other's emotions. We think of that often. I think the loss of an insane amount of hours is what freaks me out the most. I know it's not mental because I'm sane now. LOL, I'm as sane as can be. I live in Iceland. We have a deep mythology of elves and supernatural beings here, but I've always dismissed them as folklore until this trip to the Westfjords. The Westfjords are a terrifyingly beautiful place, with steep cliffs and long winding fjords. It is very remote and difficult to access, and the oldest part of Iceland. Long story short, we were driving and taking advantage of the long daylight hours sun at 1 a.m. But the weather turned bad and we decided to sleep in the Jeep on a hill very close to the sea cliffs. Now, we all fell asleep quickly with the sound of mighty waves crashing on the cliffs and the Jeep being hit with rain and sea spray. Here is where it gets weird. My friend and I had very similar vivid dreams and nightmares that night. We both dreamt we were kidnapped by mermen. Not Little Mermaid mermen, but these are scary aquatic creatures with big teeth and ugly faces. There are little details I remember, like one merman showing me a spine on its face and telling me that it was poisonous, like the same way a stingray's barbs are poisonous, and if we didn't comply it would sting us and we'd be dead in an instant. They showed us this incredible technology and a projector thing that could show you your sins. Something told me that if the sin was too great, we weren't going back home. My greatest sins were played in front of everyone, and I felt like I passed some sort of test, and we were then shown this complex. It seemed like Atlantis, very futuristic. Also got the sense we were deep underwater. Well, after this tour, we were brought back to the surface. My friend had a similar dream, mainly remembering men walking out from the sea with different details, but we both agreed that it was very strange to have dreams of being kidnapped by mermaid people. Well, this could all just be crazy dreams. On the way back, we stopped at the Sea Monster Museum in Bilgedaller, and they have an old drawing of a merman that is eerily similar to what we dreamt about. We were both very unsettled by this, so if you camp near the southern tip of Flokalundr close to the haunted cave from Gisla's saga, there is a chance you might meet an actual mermaid. But watch out, they are not babes, they are instead fish people who will eat you if you are a bad person on the inside. I was a corpsman stationed in Okinawa between 2014 to 2016. There are a lot of stories about Oki being haunted as shit. I heard a lot of Marines tell me about episodes of sleep paralysis, where they'd wake up at night unable to move, with dark figures standing over them, or more often women. Camp Hansen was particularly haunted, or so Thule say. I worked ambulance services there, and there was a particular barracks building, I can't remember the number, that received quite a few calls while I was there if possession-type incidents, where Marines would suddenly become extremely violent and begin screaming about demons to the point where it would take about 10 people to hold them down. I personally responded to one such incident. A Marine was just drinking beer down by the quarterdeck. A well-known Marine with no prior history of mental illness or incidents, a pretty straight shooter, suddenly became delirious at the drop of a hat. He went from chatting normally to smashing his face against the stairs, screaming, "Make it stop." I arrived on scene, and he was being held down by at least 8 or 9 people. He was thrashing wildly and contorting like something out of The Exorcist, trying to smash his head back against the floor. All the while repeating, "Make it stop." I did my job and got him to the I can't say for certain whether it was supernatural, as there was a big drug problem at the time as well, spice, cough syrup, OTC shit you find in Japan, and I do believe he tested positive for rhabdomyolysis, which can cause confusion. But this was really, really acute. Like at the drop of a hat, not gradual in the slightest. I was out in the desert. Something very strange happened. It was probably 1989 in New Mexico, just outside of Albuquerque. I had just turned 21 and purchased a Colt 1911 pistol. I drove out west of town to what was then called 9 Mile Hill to shoot it for the first time. I was in my 1982 Datsun pickup truck. I drove to where I thought I was alone and safe, and got out. There was the smell of death. Unmistakable. I figured it was a dog, or a cow or something, and brushed it off. I walked about 10 yards from the truck and shot off about 20 rounds or so. I was happy with the gun, so I headed back to the truck. To my horror, there was a swarm of flies, ordinary house flies, coating most of my windshield like a blanket, part of my hood, part of my fender, and my entire radio antenna. It was a blanket with no gaps or holes. Just like you would see if bees were swarming on a person. It was a blanket of flies. I would say 10 square feet easily. They wouldn't budge no matter what I did. I got inside the truck and turned on the wipers, which just pushed them around. They started to come inside, so I rolled up the window and drove to the highway. I found myself driving at 80 miles per hour, running my windshield wipers as fast as I could to get them to fly off. I went straight to a car wash and sprayed off the entire truck. To this day, no one has offered an explanation. I even told this story to our biology and our insects, and no explanation has been offered, other than my truck was a piece of shit. Someone told me that swarming flies can be associated with evil spirits. I've always wondered. About 10 years ago, I was driving home one night near Plymouth, Massachusetts. I was particularly exhausted, and it was very dark out. It was late, maybe 11 or 12, and I was out on a back road, not really paying attention to the road as I have traveled it many times before. I was speeding along, just coming up on the crest of a small hill, and my empty coffee cup fell out of the cup holder and rolled under my legs. As I reach down to get it, I take my eyes off the road to look for it. My hand hits the cup and I bring my head back up. What I saw made me jump out of my skin. It was a humanoid-like figure, with no features to speak of, but it seemed to be made of purely white light. It was extremely bright, but not blinding, and I only saw it out of the corner of my eye. Seeing this caused me to jerk the steering wheel, which was fortunate, as I was drifting off the road. As I sped past, being the curious person I am, I grabbed the rearview mirror and searched for the light. All that I saw behind me was darkness, and soon I passed over the hill. I wrote this event off as just exhaustion and continued on my way home. However, now it appears to me that it may have been a lot more than just exhaustion. I have no explanation for this, except it seems as though it kept me from running off the road. One detail I remember about it though, is even though it had no features, it reminded me of an old man, and I had a clear image of him placed in my head. That is why I so easily rationalized this and just thought it was a man walking. If anyone has any explanation as to what a humanoid figure giving off light might be, I am all ears. Anyways, that is my story of what may have been a strange event, or just exhaustion. The first time I saw a cryptid, I was 13 years old, standing knee-deep in the brackish water of Lake Champlain. My name is Ethan Grayson, and now, nearly 2 decades later, I hunt cryptids for a living. Not for glory, not for money, but because something out there killed my father. Dad was a biologist, the kind who always brought his work home. Our house smelled of formaldehyde and fish scales, and every conversation somehow circled back to taxonomy or evolutionary theory. He didn't believe in cryptids, until he saw one. That summer, he was investigating a series of mysterious deaths among the lake's fish population when he vanished without a trace. His boat was found capsized near the southern bay, the hull splintered as if something massive had rammed into it. My mother swore it was an accident. I knew better. I'd seen the thing in the water 2 days earlier. A long, sinuous shape with ridged fins slicing through the surface like razors. It wasn't a sturgeon, and it sure as hell wasn't an otter. When I told Dad, he laughed it off. That was the last time I saw him. Now, at 32, I travel the country hunting what the world pretends doesn't exist. My latest gig brought me to the dense, unyielding forests of northern Maine. Reports of mutilated livestock and strange howls had been circulating for months, and I'd been hired by a small but wealthy farming cooperative to investigate. As I stood in the shadow of the towering pines, my hand resting on the grip of my .44 Magnum, I couldn't shake the feeling that this job was different. Cryptids are rarely aggressive, at least not without cause. Whatever was lurking out here wasn't just killing to survive. It was sending a message. You sure you want to do this alone? My partner, Elena Vasquez, leaned against the hood of her truck, her arms crossed. She was a former Marine with a sharp tongue and sharper instincts. We'd worked together on and off for years, and while I trusted her with my life, she wasn't exactly the cryptid believer type. Someone's gotta do it, I said, slinging my pack over one shoulder. Besides, you'll have the easy job, running comms. She smirked. If by easy, you mean babysitting you through a satellite uplink while you play hero in the woods, sure. I laughed, but the sound felt hollow. The truth was, I didn't know what I was walking into. The reports described a creature unlike anything I'd ever encountered. Bipedal, covered in coarse black fur, with glowing red eyes. One witness claimed it spoke to her, whispered her name from the edge of the forest. The sun was setting as I entered the tree line, the fading light painting the landscape in hues of orange and gold. The air was thick with scent of pine and decay, and the ground squelched beneath my boots. I checked my GPS. No signal. Typical. By the time I reached the first reported attack site, the forest was cloaked in darkness. The remains of a cow lay sprawled across the clearing, its body torn open as if by massive claws. Flies buzzed in a sickening chorus, and the stench was nearly unbearable. I crouched down, examining the wounds. "This wasn't a bear," I murmured, snapping a photo with my phone. The cuts were too precise, too deliberate. Whatever did this had intelligence. And malice. A low growl echoed from the shadows, sending a chill down my spine. I rose slowly, my hand drifting to the holster at my side. The growl came again, closer this time, accompanied by the crunch of leaves. "Elena," I whispered into my calm, "I think I've got company." The growl reverberated through the forest, a sound that felt too deliberate, too unnatural. My fingers tightened around the grip of my .44 Magnum, the weight of it oddly comforting. Whatever was out there wasn't just an animal. It was stalking me. "Elena, you copy?" I whispered into the calm, keeping my eyes trained on the shifting shadows between the trees. Loud and clear, her voice crackled back, steady but concerned. "What's your status?" "I'm not alone," I murmured, scanning the darkened forest. The moonlight filtered weakly through the canopy, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to move on their own. "I think it's watching me." "Fall back to the truck," she ordered. "We regroup and figure out the next move. No point in playing hero out there." "Can't. I need eyes on this thing," I replied, inching forward. "If it's the cryptid, I don't want to lose it." A deep snarl cut through the air, closer this time. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned sharply, the barrel of my gun following my gaze. For a moment, the forest was deathly silent, save for the rapid thudding of my heartbeat. Then I saw it. Two glowing red eyes, hovering just above the ground, staring at me from the dense underbrush. They didn't blink, didn't move. Just watched, unyielding and full of malice. "Ethan," Elena's voice snapped me out of my trance. "You're not equipped to handle this alone. Get the hell out of there." "I'm fine," I lied, my voice barely a whisper. The creature's eyes were hypnotic, pulling me in like a predator sizing up its prey. Slowly, it rose to its full height. The descriptions hadn't done it justice. This thing was massive, easily over 7 feet tall, with broad, muscular shoulders and fur so black it seemed to absorb the light around it. It stepped into the clearing, and my stomach churned. Its head was vaguely wolf-like, with a long, pointed snout and sharp, glistening teeth. But its body was unnervingly human. Bipedal, with elongated limbs and hands tipped with claws. The creature tilted its head, as if studying me, and then it spoke. "Ethan," it growled, my name distorted into something unrecognizable, like gravel scraping against metal. I froze, my brain scrambling to process what I'd just heard. It couldn't know my name. That wasn't possible. "Elena," I hissed into the calm. "It knows my name." "What?" she barked. "Are you sure?" "I'm looking at it right now, and it just..." My words caught in my throat as the creature lunged, faster than anything that size had a right to move. I fired instinctively, the gunshot shattering the silence of the forest. The creature snarled as the bullet hit its shoulder, but it barely staggered. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second, I felt something. An emotion that wasn't my own. Rage, pain, hunger. I turned and ran, adrenaline surging through my veins. The forest blurred around me as I crashed through the underbrush, branches clawing at my face and arms. Behind me, the creature's heavy footsteps pounded against the earth, closing the distance with terrifying speed. "Elena, I need backup," I shouted into the calm. "I'm on my way," she yelled. "Just stay alive." Easier said than done. The creature let out an ear-splitting roar, the sound so loud it felt like it vibrated through my very bones. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I rolled onto my back, raising my gun just as the creature loomed over me, its red eyes burning like embers in the darkness. It snarled, a low sound that sent a shiver down my spine. And then, to my shock, it stopped. It cocked its head again, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Without warning, it turned and bolted into the trees, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body trembling from the adrenaline. Elena's voice crackled through the calm, frantic. "Ethan, talk to me. Are you okay?" "I'm alive," I managed, staring up at the dark canopy above. "But I think we've got a bigger problem than we thought." I staggered to my feet, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. My gun felt heavy in my hand, the spent cartridge still hot in the chamber. The forest had gone eerily silent, as if holding its breath. Whatever that thing was, it hadn't run because of me. Something else had scared it off. "Lena," I said into the calm, my voice shaky, "I lost it. But there's something else out here. Something big." "Define big," she replied, the concern in her tone barely masked by her usual sarcasm. "I don't know," I admitted, glancing around the clearing. The trees seemed to press closer, the shadows longer and darker than they had any right to be. But it spooked the cryptid, and that thing wasn't exactly shy. "Stay put. I'm 5 minutes out," she said. "And for the love of God, don't wander off again." I didn't respond. My attention was drawn to the ground where the creature had stood. The soil was scorched, the grass blackened and brittle. A faint, acrid smell lingered in the air like burnt ozone. I crouched down, running my fingers over the edges of the burn marks. They weren't random. They formed a rough circle, almost like a brand. A sound behind me made me spin around, gun raised. It wasn't the heavy footfalls of the cryptid or the roar of whatever had driven it off. It was a whisper. "Ethan." The voice was soft, almost soothing, but it came from nowhere and everywhere at once. My grip on the gun tightened as I scanned the forest. "Who's there?" No answer. Just the whisper again, this time closer. "Ethan." I took a step back, my pulse hammering in my ears. The air felt heavier, charged, like the moments before a lightning strike. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow darting between the trees, too fast to be human. "Elena," I hissed into the calm, "you need to hurry." "I'm 2 minutes out," she said. "Keep talking to me." "There's something here," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "It's not the cryptid. It's something else. I think it's toying with me." Another whisper, this time so close it felt like it brushed against my ear. "Ethan." I spun around, my gun trained on the source of the sound, but there was nothing there. The shadows seemed to writhe, shifting and twisting in ways that defied logic. And then I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, with elongated limbs that didn't move naturally. Its body seemed to ripple, as if it wasn't entirely solid. Its face was featureless, a blank slate of pale, shifting skin. The cryptid had been terrifying, but this was something else entirely. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Elena," I choked out, my voice trembling. "I'm here," she said, her voice grounding me. "I'm pulling up now. Where are you?" "Clearing," I managed, my eyes locked on the figure. It didn't move, just stood there, watching. Or whatever it did with that blank face. The sound of an engine shattered the silence as Elena's truck barreled into the clearing, her headlights cutting through the darkness. The figure vanished, dissolving into the shadows as if it had never been there. Elena jumped out, her rifle in hand, her eyes scanning the trees. What the hell happened? I pointed to where the figure had stood, my hand trembling. There was something here, not the cryptid, something worse. She followed my gaze but shook her head. "I don't see anything. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "It was there, Elena." It whispered my name. Her expression hardened, the skepticism replaced by something colder. "We need to leave, now." "What about the cryptid?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She glanced at the burned circle on the ground, her jaw tight. "Forget the cryptid. This is bigger than we thought. We're not equipped for this." I wanted to argue, but the fear in her eyes stopped me. Whatever we were dealing with, it wasn't something we could handle alone. As we climbed into the truck and sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just crossed a line. One we couldn't come back from. The truck's engine roared as we sped down the narrow dirt road, the towering pines blurring into a dark tunnel around us. Elena's hands gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her jaw set in a grim line. Neither of us spoke. The air in the cab was thick with unspoken fear, and I could feel my own pulse hammering in my temples. Finally, I broke the silence. "What was that thing, Elena?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on the road, scanning for anything that might lunge out of the darkness. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice low. "But I've seen marks like that before. The circle." I turned to her, my stomach tightening. "Where?" "Afghanistan," she said, her tone clipped. "My unit was stationed in a remote valley. Locals wouldn't go near it, said the place was cursed. We thought it was just superstition. Until we started finding bodies. Animals mostly, but some of them weren't. Right, like they'd been twisted into something else. There were marks like that burned into the ground near every one of them." "Did you ever find out what caused it?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She shook her head. "Command shut us down, ordered us to evacuate and classified everything. We weren't even allowed to write reports. But I've never forgotten those marks." The weight of her words settled over me like a lead blanket. Whatever we were dealing with, it wasn't just some rogue cryptid terrorizing a backwoods farm. This was something bigger. The truck jolted as we hit a pothole, snapping me out of my thoughts. I looked out the window, the forest flashing by in brief, shadowy glimpses. For the first time, I noticed how quiet it had become. No insects, no wind, just the hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. "Elena," I said, my voice uneasy, "stop the truck." "What? Why?" she asked, glancing at me. "Just do it," I insisted, my gut churning with a sense of impending dread. She slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, but there was nothing there. No animals, no movement, just an oppressive wall of darkness. "What is it?" she asked, reaching for her rifle. I opened the door and stepped out, the cold night air biting at my skin. My breath fogged in the light of the truck's beams as I scanned the forest. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. "Elena," I called over my shoulder. "Can you hear anything?" She frowned, stepping out of the truck with her rifle raised. "No. Why?" "Exactly," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's too quiet." The silence was unnatural, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. And then, just as I was about to speak again, I saw it. A shadow moved at the edge of the headlights, too fast and too fluid to be human. "Elena," I hissed, "we're not alone." She swung her rifle up, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the tree line. "I see it," she muttered. The shadow darted closer, and for a brief moment, the headlights caught it. A pale, faceless figure, its body rippling and shifting like smoke. It stopped just outside the circle of light, tilting its head as if studying us. "Ethan," it whispered, its voice impossibly soft and yet clear as a bell. My blood ran cold. "You hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Elena nodded, her grip on the rifle tightening. "Yeah, I hear it." The figure stepped forward, its movements eerily graceful. Its featureless face seemed to ripple, and for a moment, I thought I saw something. A flash of eyes, a mouth twisted into a smile. But it was gone before I could be sure. "What do you want?" Elena demanded, her voice steady despite the fear I knew she felt. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised one long, spindly arm and pointed at me. "Ethan," it said again, the word dripping with something that felt like mockery. I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. "Why does it know my name?" I whispered, more to myself than to Elena. Before she could respond, the figure lunged. So fast it was a blur. Elena fired, the muzzle flash lighting up the night. But the figure was already gone, dissolving into the shadows like smoke. "Get in the truck," Elena shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me back. We scrambled into the cab, slamming the doors just as the shadow reappeared, circling the truck like a predator sizing up its prey. I reached for my gun, but Elena stopped me. "Don't," she said. It's not afraid of bullets. What do we do? I asked, panic rising in my throat. She hesitated, her eyes locked on the shadow as it circled closer. We wait, she said finally, her voice grim. And we pray it gets bored. The shadow circled the truck, its movements slow and deliberate, as though savoring our fear. Inside the cab, the air was thick with tension. Elena's grip on her rifle was white-knuckled, her eyes darting from the rearview mirrors to the darkness ahead. My own pulse thundered in my ears as I gripped the edge of the seat, trying to steady my breathing. It knows my name, Elena, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Why does it know my name? Don't focus on that, she snapped, her tone harsher than usual. Focus on staying alive. I bit back a retort, knowing she was right, but the question burned in my mind. The figure's voice, soft, mocking, intimate, echoed in my head, making my skin crawl. It wasn't just a random predator. It had singled me out. Outside, the figure stopped moving. It stood at the edge of the headlights, its elongated limbs casting impossible shadows that stretched across the forest floor. For the first time, I noticed something new. Its chest, or where its chest should have been, seemed to shimmer faintly, as though something pulsed beneath its translucent surface. What the hell is it doing? I asked, my voice trembling. Elena didn't answer. She was focused on the figure, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. It's waiting, she said finally. It wants us to make the first move. Then what do we do? Her jaw tightened. We hold our ground. It's testing us. If we panic, we're done. I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold my nerve. The figure took a step forward, its body rippling like smoke. The faint shimmering in its chest grew brighter, casting an eerie, pulsating glow that seemed to warp the air around it. Elena, I said, my voice shaking, do you see that? She nodded, her eyes narrowing. Yeah, I see it. The glow intensified, and I felt a strange pressure in my skull, like the air itself was pressing down on me. It wasn't painful, but it was disorienting, making it hard to think. I pressed my palms to my temples, trying to block it out. Elena, I can't. Stay with me, Ethan, she barked, snapping me out of my daze. Focus on my voice. Don't let it get inside your head. Her words anchored me, but the pressure didn't relent. Outside, the figure raised one spindly arm and pointed at the truck. The glow from its chest pulsed brighter, and a low, vibrating hum filled the air, resonating deep in my bones. Elena, I whispered, panic rising in my throat. It's doing something. Brace yourself, she shouted, throwing her arm across me as if to shield me. The glow exploded outward in a blinding flash of light, and the world seemed to tilt. I felt the truck lurch violently, the sound of shattering glass and twisting metal filling my ears. And then everything went black. When I came to, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The oppressive hum was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. My head throbbed and my vision was blurry, but I could make out the faint outline of Elena slumped against the steering wheel. Elena, I croaked, reaching out to shake her shoulder. Elena, wake up. She stirred with a groan, her hand moving to her temple. What? What happened? The thing, I said, my voice hoarse. It did something. There was a flash, and I stopped mid-sentence as my vision cleared. The truck was no longer on the road. We were in a clearing surrounded by trees that were twisted and blackened, their bark peeling away like charred skin. The ground was scorched in a perfect circle, much larger than the one we'd seen before. Elena, I said, my voice trembling. Where are we? She sat up, her eyes widening as she took in our surroundings. This isn't right. We didn't drive here. No kidding, I muttered, though there was no humor in my tone. My gaze darted around the clearing, searching for any sign of the figure. Do you think it brought us here? She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the door and stepped out, her rifle at the ready. I followed, my legs shaky beneath me. The air was thick and heavy, carrying a faint, acrid smell that burned my nostrils. The trees seemed to lean toward us, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. In the center of the clearing was another burn mark, identical to the one we'd seen before, but larger and more intricate. Symbols I didn't recognize were etched into the ground, glowing faintly with the same pulsating light I'd seen in the figure's chest. "This is bad," Elena said, her voice low. "This is really bad." "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at me, her expression grim. "We figure out what it wants, and we do it fast. Because if this thing brought us here, it's not done with us yet." The clearing seemed alive, pulsing with an energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the intricate symbols carved into the ground, their faint glow shifting between a pale green and deep crimson. My instincts screamed to run, but where? The twisted forest surrounding us felt more like a cage than an escape route. Elena knelt by the symbols, her rifle slung over her shoulder as she carefully traced one with her gloved finger. Her expression was hard to read, but I could see the gears turning in her mind. "Do you recognize any of this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "No," she replied, her tone clipped. "But I've seen something similar in those files your boss handed over. This isn't random, it's intentional." The word sent a shiver through me. Intentional. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just some mindless predator. It had a purpose, and somehow, we were a part of it. "Elena," I said, stepping closer. "This thing knew my name. It brought us here. Why me?" She glanced up at me, her green eyes sharp and probing. "You tell me, Ethan. Did you see something? Hear something? Anything that might have marked you?" I hesitated, my mind flashing back to the first case I ever worked. The disappearance of a farmer outside of Idaho Falls. The man's house had been littered with strange drawings. Circles within circles just like this. And then there was the journal, filled with ramblings about the faceless ones and the mark of return. There was something, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. My first case. The victim. He was obsessed with symbols like these. He called them gateways. Elena frowned, her gaze flicking back to the glowing symbols. "Gateways to what?" "I don't know," I said, swallowing hard. "But he wrote that they were watchers. That they didn't just take people. They marked them, called them back when the time was right." Her jaw clenched. "And you didn't think to mention this earlier?" "I didn't think it was real," I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "I thought it was the ramblings of a paranoid man. I didn't think it had anything to do with me." Before she could respond, the air around us shifted. The faint hum from earlier returned, growing louder and deeper, vibrating through the ground and into my bones. The symbols on the ground flared to life, their light blinding. "Elena," I shouted, shielding my eyes. She was already moving, pulling me back as the center of the clearing began to ripple, the ground warping like liquid. From the shimmering distortion, the figure emerged, its body more defined now but no less terrifying. Its chest still pulsed with that eerie glow, but its face, or lack of one, seemed sharper, as though it had taken a more solid form. "Elena," it said, its voice echoing unnaturally. "Ethan." The way it spoke our names sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just saying them, it was claiming them. "What do you want?" Elena demanded, raising her rifle. The figure tilted its head, the motion almost curious. "The marked one returns," it said, ignoring her. Its faceless gaze was locked on me. "Elena," I said, my voice trembling, "it's talking about me." "I figured that out, thanks," she muttered. The figure raised a long, spindly arm, pointing directly at my chest. "The gateway is open. You will come." "Like hell he will," Elena snapped, stepping in front of me. She fired, the bullet tearing through the figure's chest. But instead of falling, it rippled, as though made of water, and reformed instantly. "Elena," I hissed, "it's not going to work." She lowered her rifle, her jaw tightening. "Then we need another plan, fast." The ground beneath us began to quake, the symbols glowing brighter with each pulse. The air grew heavier, making it hard to breathe. I could feel something pulling at me, an invisible force drawing me toward the center of the clearing. "Elena," I shouted, panic rising in my throat. She grabbed my arm, her grip strong and reassuring. "Stay with me, Ethan. You're not going anywhere." But the pull grew stronger, and I could feel my feet sliding toward the rippling distortion. The figure stepped aside, as if welcoming me into whatever hellish dimension lay beyond. "Elena," I said, my voice cracking. "I don't think I can fight it." "Yes, you can," she said, her voice fierce. "You're stronger than this thing. Whatever it wants, don't give it the satisfaction." I tried to focus on her words, on the anger in her eyes, but the pull was relentless. And then, just as I thought I was about to lose the fight, Elena did something I didn't expect. She stepped into the circle. "Elena, no!" I screamed, reaching for her, but it was too late. The symbols flared with blinding light, and the pull stopped instantly. The figure turned its faceless head toward her, its body rippling with confusion. Or perhaps amusement. "You cannot save him," it said, its voice deeper now. "Watch me," Elena spat, raising her rifle again. This time, she aimed for the glowing center of the symbols. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady, "run." "Elena, I'm not leaving you." She didn't look at me. Her focus was locked on the figure. "You have to. Whatever this thing is, it's after you. If you stay, neither of us is making it out of here." I hesitated, torn between terror and loyalty. But the look in her eyes left no room for argument. "Go," she shouted. I turned and ran, the sound of her rifle firing behind me. As I reached the edge of the clearing, I looked back one last time. The figure was still standing, its attention fully on Elena. And then, in a flash of light, they were both gone. I don't know how I made it back to civilization. The next thing I remember is stumbling into a gas station at dawn, covered in dirt and shaking like a leaf. I told the clerk I'd been lost in the woods, and he called the authorities. Elena's name never appeared in any reports. The clearing didn't exist on any maps. And the figure? I don't think it's done with me, because sometimes, late at night, I hear it. That voice, soft and mocking, whispering my name. Ethan. This incident happened in October 1973. It was a common occurrence for my mother and I to observe strange objects in the air that looked like nothing we had ever seen. Triangular objects that would stop and start randomly. More circular objects that would move vertically as well as horizontally. It seemed as if they were performing for us. It was explained to my mother that they were experimental aircraft from the Air Force Base in Columbus, Mississippi. We looked forward to our entertainment. One fall evening, my parents were in the house and I was outside alone. I wandered several hundred yards behind our house and felt, heard, and saw simultaneously a large, cigar or blimp-shaped object. A fat cigar or skinny blimp. It was a dull pewter color. Then it emitted a white light down. The craft was not on the ground but hovered just below tree level. I was drawn to the light and had a feeling of total comfort, almost euphoria. I have no idea how I got there, but I came to a room with no windows. There were no lights, but it was very bright. There were 3 male and 1 female human-like people there. The men looked like super athletes, close to 7 feet tall. Blonde hair, blue eyes which were a little larger than normal. The clothing was plain, but skin-tight, and almost appeared to be painted on. The woman was a few inches shorter and very curvy. I was only 10 years old, but I immediately had a feeling of comfort, trust, and even attraction to her. As I was looking around, I had no discomfort. All I could move was my eyes and head. They touched me, had something like a wand, and went all around me with it. The entire time we communicated but didn't talk. It was primarily them telling me the evils of nuclear power or weapons, and to always do all I could to stay away from and stop its use. They also told me that they would be watching after me and mine. Not to worry, I would always be taken care of. Over the next few years, I had communication with them, but it was a less vivid memory. I would be asleep, have almost a feeling of a dream I was aboard, then wake up in a chair outside. I always felt great after these visits. I found myself looking forward to these. I told my mother after the first and every other encounter I had. She told me that she believed me, and that it could be real or could be a dream. But convinced me not to tell anyone else, because they would not understand, and it would make life hard on me. Sometime later I noticed a 2-3 centimeter hard object just under the skin on my left outer mid-thigh. I have asked several doctors, but have had no explanation on what it is. I have had spontaneous pneumothorax collapsed lung for no apparent reason 5 times as a teenager. No problem since. I put this repressed or did not think that this could be real, as these were not bad experiences, and were not like aliens that I have read about. I did a search on the internet to find a movie, and a picture of the type of people that took me came up. That is when I have had a flood of these memories return. I have a great life. I am a successful eye doctor in Jackson, Mississippi, with a wonderful, healthy family. I just felt compelled to report this. Think my childhood friends saw a dogman. When I was a kid, my 2 closest friends just happened to live right next to each other in the eastern countryside of my town. One of them told me he woke up to go to the bathroom or something, and said he saw a pair of yellow glowing eyes staring in at him. When I stayed the night with him one night, I questioned him about it, and he was so terrified that I brought it up that he tried to go sleep with his mom. I eavesdropped, and he told her he was scared that the yellow eyes were going to come back. His neighbor, my other friend, was staying the night with me at one night. He told me about this huge black dog that he saw in the back of his pasture where their horses were during the day. He said it was about the size of a horse and on all 4s. He really emphasized how large it was, which is the main thing upset him. Not far from this road, there is a very old graveyard that locals claim is an old Indian graveyard. It has gravestones dating back to the 1800s. I've had 3 very unusual experiences there that tie into some of the dogman folklore I've learned about, like hearing a howl so loud and deep that it reverberated through my friend and I, and both of us took of running towards the car in a fight or flight response. I had a 4th paranormal experience there, but it wasn't dogman related. The town east of Claremore called Pryor Creek also has a dogman encounter on YouTube. Large predators have very large territories, so I wonder if we have a dogman prowling the area, living here. It would not be impossible given the amount of farmland, woods, and rural expansions of land here. Our nearby city, Tulsa, also has a few published sightings. Just been connecting the dots. So, I know in the past I mentioned an encounter with what I think may have been a dogman, yet I haven't posted the full story. It's taken me a while to find the time, and it's taken a long time for the trauma to settle, so that this period in my life could be looked at from a more objective viewpoint. I've never really revealed anything this personal to the general public before, and I anticipate this post may get a bit more attention as well, so it's a bit nerve-wracking for me. But after keeping it secret for years, I think it's about time this becomes known. Before anyone gets too invested in this post, I should note that I did not actually see that much of the dogman. I put that in quotes because I am still not 100% sure if that is what it was, but I still find it the most plausible. This is more about the experience and how it and the creature have affected my life. So, here it is. This experience took place when I was 10 years old. At the time, I only had my mother taking care of me, no father around. We lived with my great-grandmother-in-law for the majority of my childhood. My mom had made friends with a woman who owned a large lakefront property near Lake Michigan in Wisconsin. She made an offer to let us live in a small cabin on the property she owned in exchange for work at her art shop. So we ended up flying up in approximately 27. One thing that helps me remember the year is that the next year after we came back, Obama was elected president. Now, this property was located in a relatively isolated area. There were other inhabitants in the general area, but from the main road, you would have to turn onto this gravel road that led into this heavily wooded area, drive for a minute or 2, and then you would be on the property. On this property was a small, deep pond, a shed, the woman's house, which was decent, not too upscale but better than our cabin, and behind the house was a cliff that overlooked a shoreline of Lake Michigan. Once you get onto the property, you are surrounded by woods. In hindsight, it sounds like I'm describing a horror movie setting, so when we first arrived there, I believe it was mid or late summer, possibly early fall. One weird detail was the presence of this large, red, dead fish that was just laying on the ground. I found it in between the small deep pond and the shed. It was so out of place. It was a big fish and couldn't have come from that little pond. I have tried to Google what types of large, red fish live in Lake Michigan, but nothing I found looks like the fish I saw. The closest thing I could compare it to was a red snapper. Now that I look it up, it looks a lot like it. Part of my mind is trying to rationalize this as maybe someone from the woman's household bought it, didn't like it, and threw it out. But why anyway? That was just the first of many odd things that occurred. I honestly can't remember too many other normal life details of my time spent in Wisconsin since we were barely there a year. But when winter came, that's when I remember things started to get a little strange. In the snow around the shed, there were these odd, huge footprints. The thing is, I remember them being round and sort of compared their roundness to an elephant's foot. But I don't think they were that round. Just rounder than any normal snow footprint I've seen. My mother chalked them up to bear footprints since that was the only rational explanation we could come up with. But I don't remember them being shaped like a bear's. There were also some other strange snowprints. One of them looked like someone put on a pair of snow skis and walked through the snow a little. The strange thing about them is, after a while they just stopped. My mother was weirded out about these ones. It was like whatever was walking there flew away or disappeared or something. I've considered that someone around there may have been walking in snow skis, but this was a fairly level, dense forest. My mom said she heard something on the radio about a wallaby escaping from captivity or something, so we just kinda sort of assumed it may have been that. We made a cute little song about bears and wallabies playing on the range or something. Now for the shitty part. Fast forward a couple of months. It was in the middle of winter, and it was absolutely freezing cold outside. We're talking sub-zero temperatures. I think because we were so close to the lake, it was worse. This encounter happened late at night. Our cottage had one floor and a loft where I slept. I can't remember every detail of what exactly happened, but everything seemed normal until I was woken up by my mother panicking in the middle of the night. She ordered me to stay up in the loft and not come down. I was so confused and scared because I had never seen her act like this. And she wouldn't tell me what was going on. She had me bring up the ladder so in case something got in it, would have a harder time reaching me. So for about what felt like an hour I stayed in the loft, watching my mom as she was looking at the window with a knife in one hand, and a phone on the other, scared shitless until the police arrived. When they got there, she told them she heard banging on the side of our cottage, which didn't make sense to me at the time because I didn't hear anything like that. We left the place that night and found a motel which was just about to close until we came. I remember what that room looked like. That was without a doubt the most traumatic night of my life. I thought we were gonna die because something was after us, and I'm pretty sure my mom did too. We had just moved to this cottage in Wisconsin, and we weren't even there for a full year. The incident was so terrifying that my mom immediately booked a flight back to Pia where we originally lived, but our flight was delayed. I remember doing what kids do, be impatient and move around a lot in the airport. I had stepped on a metal part of this flat escalator, which left dirt marks. This janitor guy got mad at me, and so did my mother, and I went back to feeling like shit. While we were sitting in the waiting area, there was this rude family with a girl who was making fun of me for some reason, pointing and laughing at me a little bit. We were unfortunately seated next to each other on the flight, and for some reason, she started picking off her hair and placing them on my mom. It was an awkward flight with a lot of tension, which made it even worse. I also remember cussing at them on the way out of the airport. It was out of character for me to do, but goddamn was I out of it. Since we were and still are very poor, we have lived with my great-grandmother for most of my childhood, never truly owning a home or property. So when we left Wisconsin, we had to come back. Things seemed to be normal for a while, and it had been a couple of months after this incident. Then for some unknown reason, my mother began behaving extremely neurotic, which I had no clue why. It really stressed me out when she would do this. I can't exactly remember what she was doing, but it was enough to stress a young child out. One day she slept for longer than usual, and when she woke up she thought she had urinated blood as her urine was a darkish color. She kept saying that she had missing time, like she had experienced an unusual amount of missing time or something. This insanity went on for about a week or so. Now for my encounter. So on one of those nights, we were in the kitchen. My mom was making something to eat and I was sitting at the dinner table staring outside the kitchen window. The house we lived in sat on a large incline that overlooked the town area, and I was looking at the lights from the city. Right outside of the house near this window was a large oak tree that was close to our house, with its branches being above the window about 10-30 feet away. It was dark, so you couldn't see anything else but the distant lights. So as I was sitting there, staring at the town lights, something red appeared in the peripheral corner of my eye. I had thought it was another city light, so my vision slowly wandered over until I was looking directly at it. One singular, glowing eye. Sort of reptilian in shape. From my memory, it's not exactly like how Mothman is usually described. I sort of remember a slit pupil like a lizard, but more luminous. I don't remember seeing another red eye, but it may have been obstructed by leaves or branches. I sat there kind of daydreaming a bit, not totally comprehending what I was seeing. Then it blinked. I remember backing away from the table saying, "Oh no, please no," and telling my mom there was something outside of the window. She looked and saw it, but didn't immediately panic like I did. Honestly, this night might have been worse than the first. No, actually, I think it was because I saw it. We went up into the bedroom and were just kind of sitting there, clueless on what to do. My mom resorted back to her manic behavior and basically stayed praying over me until I fell asleep. She was still doing it when I woke up. Then we got into my mom's van and left. What happened next was super stressful, to the point where I just wanted to die. For the next day or two, my mother would drive us around aimlessly in her van. She didn't have any direction or destination, she just drove crazed out of her mind. We would occasionally stop back at our grandmother's house in the daytime, but we wouldn't stay there at night. At some point, a mattress was brought into the back of her van for me to sleep on. I think we stayed in a lighted parking lot the night when I fell asleep. When I woke up, she was still driving around. I hated and pleaded and begged for her to let us just go back home, even though I was also scared about returning. After much coercion and persuasion, I eventually talked her into going back to our grandmother's house, so I could sleep in a comfortable bed. I was still just a kid and was really tired of this bullshit. She was so paranoid and panicked that when we came back, she didn't let me eat the food she had previously made, even though it was perfectly fine. I was hungry, and to this day I hate letting any food go to waste. I had a collection of stuffed animals that meant a lot to me. As memorabilia, she put them all in a black trash bag. I found them, but she still wouldn't let me have them. I think she burned them because she was burning a bunch of other stuff because of her out-of-control manic mental state. God, I hated that she did that. This hurt me a lot. I loved those things. She ended up putting multiple cross statues and Jesus pictures across the house, as well as outside, on the porch, on the oak tree. Even put some cross symbols on doors around the house. You know, this is actually kind of painful to remember now, even though it's so far back and removed. Like, mentally painful. One other odd thing that happened though, while she was burning things, my grandmother gave my mom this old Bible-looking book for some reason. This just wasn't any old Bible either. It had a hard leather covering with some sort of carving on the cover. This Bible was in a language I did not know, but used the English alphabet characters. It had old-looking black and white images that looked medieval in style, though I can't remember what they depicted. Probably some disturbing medieval art. My mom burned it. For the longest time, I was perplexed about what this book was, what it meant to my grandma. Was it truly a cursed and evil item that needed to be destroyed? I spent some time searching for clues, and found what looks almost exactly like the Bible my mom burned. I can't remember if this was exactly what this Bible looked like, but it's pretty damn close. Does anyone here know anything about this Bible? I also read that it might be Lutheran. Eventually, we found a place to stay with one of my mom's friends in her basement, stayed there for a week or two, and then eventually a shelter for abused women. It did work out though, since we received some help after that, and found a place in Ohio where we could live. This incident became a thing we were able to eventually leave in the past and get over, but occasionally we do bring it up and talk about it since. At first, it was hard because she would not talk about it at all, but later on, we were able to discuss it, and I got her to tell me what she saw outside our cabin in Wisconsin. What she said she saw were two red lights about 5,100 feet away from our cottage. She showed me how it was moving, whatever it was, not erratically but keeping its distance. Behind our cottage was this heavily forested area. This thing was about 5,100 feet away from our cottage in this forested area. Mom physically showed how it is sort of getting closer to the cottage, though it was still a considerable distance away. The two red lights never got close, or at least close enough for her to describe any features other than those two red lights. She would not let me come down from the loft to check out why she was panicking and what was happening. She had called the police and said that she had heard banging on the side of our cottage, because she knew that was more believable than if she were to describe what she was seeing. She had a knife the whole time before the cops came. As soon as the cop car arrived, she said whatever this thing was looked over at the police lights coming through, turned around and took off running near a dilapidated barn that was located near where this thing was, further back into the forest. I never had a glimpse of this thing in Wisconsin. At first, she chalked it up to somebody with red goggles stalking us, or maybe playing a prank. She was surprisingly skeptical about it being something like a cryptid. However, this argument doesn't really hold up because during our first encounter in Wisconsin, it was late at night during winter. It was extremely cold up where we lived, and especially since we lived right next to a great lake. I don't think anybody would have been out there to play a prank like that, or try and spy on us through a small window in our cottage. Now, this is where a strange little discrepancy pops up. Sometime after the first encounter of this thing in Wisconsin, we again had an encounter with a red glowing-eyed being right outside of our grandmother's house, which we had lived for many years secure, and without paranormal incident. This to me suggests that this may have been the same entity in both encounters. So how did it travel such a distance? Why did it travel across many hundreds of miles just to harass us? It has no logic. Such a feat makes me believe that whatever we encountered was not a normal physical being, bound by laws of physicality, and traversing such distances really would not be a problem for it. There's also the subject of what this really was. For many years, the only explanation that I could come up with is that it was an actual, real demon. Since this incident, it has popped up into my mind occasionally. Sometimes I would just happen to click myself into the paranormal side of YouTube where they talk about cryptids and supernatural happenings and phenomena. This piqued my curiosity, and I began doing some online research, comparing other people's encounters and descriptions of various kinds to my own. I have since read, heard, and listened to other people's encounters with beings that also have glowing red eyes. This actually appears to be a common phenomena that comes up in such encounters. There are a few Bigfoot sightings which some are reported to have red eyes. Both the Mothman and the Flatwoods Monster were described with red glowing eyes. I have read of one or two alien encounters where they had red eyes. And apparently, dogmen are often reported as having glowing red eyes as well, though not all. This is definitely a supernatural phenomenon, and one that inspires fear. I would go back and forth in my mind trying to figure out which cryptid this could have been. I did not see the whole body, thank God. If I saw a giant werewolf-looking thing with murder eyes and a tree outside, my soul would have jumped out of my body. I have heard many other people on the DME podcast describe them with red eyes, and there was one episode in particular that reminded me of my own encounter. Only the guy could see the full body. He said it was also in a tree. Then there was the location. I think where I lived was not too far off from Bray Road, where the infamous beast of Bray Road was reported. That one had red eyes. I honestly don't have too much else to compare, but if anything would be living out in that forest, walking around in Antarctic winds and deep snow without a problem, it would probably be one of these beasts. I apologize that this post was so long and probably includes some unnecessary details. I originally just wanted to post my encounters with this thing that harassed us. It's just that I have never told anybody about this entire ordeal, this chapter of my life, mostly bound by paranoia coming from my mom. It almost feels kind of good to get off my chest, cathartic to type this out. To this day, that shit still sticks with me. Also, sorry if this post seems a bit unorganized and chaotic. I stayed up over an hour typing this out and haven't proofread it because I got tired and wanted to get it out before I fell asleep. If anybody is interested in hearing more about this or wants to offer any advice or explanations or anything, please feel free to comment. I hope somebody finds this interesting, and I am hoping for the best feedback. Thank you for reading. Hello everyone. I live in rural Southwest Virginia in Appalachia and heard odd whistling in the woods a few days ago at night. It started when I was playing airsoft alone in the woods at about 7 p.m. In almost pitch black, I live a lonely existence and was walking around the woods behind my house. I got to a clearing just on top of a hill and sat down to take a rest. Just when I sat down, I heard odd whistling. It was perfect whistling, and it whistled a tune I had never heard before. It was clear, and it sounded close, within 150 feet or less, and came directly from behind me. It would have had to be in the woods, near the property line with one of our neighbors. It instantly gave me chills down my back, and I got the feeling of being watched. I, not being an idiot and having a brain, wasted no time in sprinting full speed down towards my house, hopping over rocks and limbs. The whistling stopped shortly after I got moving, but I still felt like I was being watched and like something was off. I didn't see anything when I did turn back to look while opening a gate, but that may be because of the darkness and the distance I had moved. I don't think it was a bird, as the leaves on the trees haven't regrown yet, and it still stays cold at night and sometimes during the day, but I don't know much about birds. There were also no birds to be seen, and everything else was quiet. I also doubt it was a person, as I heard no talking, no leaves crunching, and no other noises. I should also mention the whistling started out of nowhere and did not gradually get louder as if someone or something was moving closer while whistling. I should also mention that I've been in those woods a decent amount of my life and have never heard anything like it before, not even once. I was a bit tired, but I've been more tired before while being up in those woods at similar times before, and I'm not one to hallucinate. The situation still gives me chills when I think about it. I've had the feeling of being watched before in those woods, but those feelings have never been so intense and extreme as that one night. I was hoping if anyone could know what it was. Was it an animal? Maybe, but me and my family have dogs around the house, and most wild animals stay away, and I haven't really seen anything outside of a bear or two and deer in those woods. I should also mention the dogs occasionally bark randomly into the woods, but they weren't really barking at the moment when the whistling happened. I was hoping anyone could identify what it was, maybe, if there is even enough information, and I'm not saying it was paranormal, but I'm not saying it was just a wild animal. Also, apologies for typing so much, I just want to make sure all the details are included. My father's sighting. We were living in northern part of the main part of Michigan back in the 80s. One evening, I saw a herd of deer running across the field and into the woods. I had also heard a howl of a wolf. I wasn't too interested, but I knew Dad liked being a wildlife spotter, so I went in and told him that I think the deer were spooked by a wolf pack. Dad got up, grabbed the binoculars off the table by the door and went out. I sat down and started watching my Friday night shows, thinking nothing of it. Then the door slammed and I heard Day holler at Mom. It stood up, ran to their bedroom and came out loading the shotgun and stood by the door. Mom told me to go downstairs to the finished basement and watch my TV down there. Dad spent the night in a chair in the living room. The gun was never put back in his gun cabinet. The next day I asked what was wrong since he was still looking out the front window. He didn't say. Said he didn't want to scare me. Not that it helped, because at the age of 9, I was imagining all sorts of horrors. He passed last year and I was going through his things with Mom, and I saw this folder with werewolf on it. Inside he had handwritten notes and a few pictures he took. The pictures didn't show anything interesting, but one showed a 6-foot hay roll and his notes said that it stood taller than the roll. Other pictures showed the churned dirt from a herd of deer running flat out. I'm not totally convinced that he saw something like the dogman, but something scared him. He never used to hunt with friends during deer season, but after that it was always him and his buddies. Sorry if this isn't too exciting, and for the fact that it's secondhand, I was too into the Dukes of Hazzard when it happened to give a care. My name is Jason Ford, and hiking has been my lifeline since I was a kid. I've trekked the rough terrain of Colorado, the deep forests of Oregon, and the harsh deserts of Nevada. I know how to survive out there. The wilderness is my sanctuary. At least, it used to be. In late summer, my friend Nick Russo and I planned a 2-week hike into the vast wilderness of Colorado's San Juan Mountains. These mountains were a sacred place to us, familiar and dependable, and we'd visited every year since college. This time, though, it felt different from the start. There was a thickness in the air, an unsettling quiet that seemed to blanket everything. The first few days were as they always were. Laughing, hiking, and feeling like we had the world to ourselves. But the further we hiked, the heavier the silence seemed to grow, as if the forest were somehow holding its breath. Then we noticed the footprints. It was day 4 when we first saw them. We were about 15 miles off the nearest trail in the heart of the wilderness. At first, it seemed like regular animal tracks. But as we examined them closer, we realized there was something distinctly wrong. The tracks were massive, larger than a bear's, with claw marks so deep that they gouged into the rocky soil. The stride was strange, almost as if whatever had made them was walking on 2 legs, but in a dragging motion. And there was a smell. A sickly sweet, metallic stench that lingered in the air, sticking to the back of our throats. "Mountain lion," Nick suggested, though I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Not like any lion I've ever seen," I muttered, my gaze tracing the path of the tracks as they wound deeper into the forest. But what truly disturbed us was that the tracks seemed to be following our path, mirroring every turn, every change in elevation. Whatever it was, it had been watching us, and it was getting closer. That night, we decided to set up camp early. We made a small fire, hoping the warmth and light would be enough to drive off whatever was out there. Neither of us said it, but we both knew that tonight, sleep was out of the question. Around midnight, I heard it. A growl just beyond the ring of light cast by the fire. I nudged Nick awake, and we both sat there, straining our ears, gripping our flashlights, waiting. Then, from the darkness, 2 pale, reflective eyes stared back at us. They were low to the ground at first, almost like a crouching animal. But then they rose higher, and higher. Whatever it was, it had to be at least 7 feet tall. We stayed frozen, barely breathing, as it just stood there, watching us. The firelight flickered, casting shadows that danced across its massive, hulking form. Then, with a shuddering howl that made the hairs on my neck stand up, it vanished into the darkness, leaving us in stunned silence. By morning, neither of us could pretend that what we'd seen was just a trick of the light. We knew we had to turn back. But as we packed up, we realized something chilling. The creature's tracks surrounded our camp, circling us like a predator stalking its prey. With every step, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees were denser, the air heavier. We followed our map religiously, but no matter which way we went, the tracks kept reappearing, always just a little closer than before. I glanced back at Nick, who was pale and tense. "We'll get through this," I said, trying to sound confident. But I was beginning to doubt it myself. Then came the first signs of blood. Around noon, we stumbled upon a small clearing, and there, in the middle of it, was a horrifying sight. Fresh blood was splattered across the ground, a trail leading into the trees. Clumps of fur and broken branches marked a struggle, but there was no body. Only the unmistakable signs of a violent encounter. "Whatever it was, it's hunting," Nick whispered, his voice barely audible. My stomach churned as we followed the blood trail deeper into the forest. There was an unnatural silence, broken only by the soft squelch of blood underfoot. Every step felt like it was leading us closer to something we didn't want to find. Then we saw it. A deer carcass, mutilated and partially eaten. Its chest was torn open, bones exposed, and that same metallic stench filled the air. But what disturbed me most were the marks. Deep, claw-like gouges raked down its side, far too precise and vicious for any animal I'd ever known. By dusk, the creature was closer than ever. We could feel it watching us, its eyes following our every move. The forest was suffocatingly quiet, as though every other animal had fled, leaving us alone with it. We didn't bother setting up camp that night. Instead, we found a large tree and took shifts, keeping watch with our flashlights and knives, our backs against the trunk. It circled us, sometimes close enough that we could hear the crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig. And then, in the early hours of the morning, it attacked. One moment, the forest was silent. The next, it erupted into chaos as the creature lunged from the shadows, a blur of fur and claws. I heard Nick scream, saw him fall as it tore into him. I swung my knife wildly, felt it make contact, and heard a snarl as the creature recoiled. In the dim light of dawn, I caught a glimpse of its face. Elongated, almost canine, with teeth that gleamed in the early light. And those eyes. Those cold, predatory eyes bore into me before it vanished into the trees once more. I was barely holding it together as I dragged Nick to his feet, his arm bleeding heavily. We had to keep moving. Adrenaline surged through me, dulling the pain in my legs, the exhaustion that clawed at my mind. The creature followed us relentlessly, a shadow in the corner of our vision, always there, waiting for the moment we would falter. The forest felt endless, stretching out before us in an unending maze of trees and shadows. We stumbled upon an old cabin just as night was beginning to fall. It was abandoned, decrepit, but it had 4 walls and a door. We barricaded ourselves inside, using broken furniture and whatever debris we could find, and waited. The creature didn't keep us waiting long. We heard it outside, scratching at the walls, its heavy breathing echoing through the thin wood. It was only a matter of time before it broke through. In the dead of night, the creature finally forced its way inside. It was a mass of fur and claws, moving with terrifying speed and precision. I fought with everything I had, swinging my knife, using whatever I could find as a weapon. Nick was barely conscious, his face pale from blood loss. Then, in a desperate moment, I grabbed a jagged piece of wood and drove it into the creature's chest. It let out a blood-curdling scream, thrashing as it stumbled back, clawing at the wood. I seized the moment, dragging Nick out of the cabin as the creature writhed in agony. We didn't stop running until we were clear of the forest, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. We collapsed on the road, gasping for breath, covered in blood and dirt. Nick was alive, but barely. Nick never fully recovered. He carries the scars of that night, both on his body and in his mind. As for me, I left Colorado, leaving behind the mountains and the forests that had once been my refuge. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, waiting. It's not a story I tell lightly, but you need to understand. There are things in this world that defy reason, things that see us as prey. So if you ever find yourself in the deep woods, remember my story. And if you hear footsteps behind you, or catch a glimpse of eyes in the darkness, run.